Believe it or not, almost 25% of Americans are unbanked or underbanked. Bottom line, they don't trust financial institutions. As a result, these folks find it difficult to borrow money at reasonable interest rates. When paying bills, they often have to do so with cash or pay high fees for money orders. Is the fear of financial institutions justified? Today's guest will help answer that question and many more. Ultimately, only you can make a decision about whether or not to use a financial institution to bank your earned income. When you make that decision, you'll also need to decide if you like to use a national bank, a community bank, or a credit union. Today, we welcome Sharla Reinhart to Focus on the Future. Sharla is an executive with New Mexico Educators Credit Union, and she will share her expertise with us and help us decide if creating a relationship with a financial institution makes sense. Welcome to Focus on the Future, Sharla.
Good morning, Skip. How are you?
Awfully good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Tell us, before we start our questions today, a little bit about yourself and your background with New Mexico Educators.
I joined New Mexico Educators in 1993, so I've been here for 18 years. It's taught me a lot. This has been a fantastic job for me. I've learned a lot about the options that we have as a nation in terms especially of banking. I've learned how to better manage my money, how to help others better manage their money, and how to be more successful at what we do in life, because money is what drives us these days.
Yes, indeed it does. I'm anxious to do this because I am very curious about the difference between a bank and a credit union. We're going to come down to that. And I know that you're going to tell us a little bit of story about how credit unions started, and I'm excited to hear that as well. Before we start, though, let's come back to what I talked about in the narrative leading up to our interview, and that is that 25% of Americans are either underbanked or unbanked completely. Why is that, do you think?
Oh, there's a lot of reasons. Part of it is lack of education on their part. You know, people seldom go somewhere they're not used to. They wouldn't go to the art museum either because they don't know anything about art or appreciate it. So there's that population. There's the population that has been burned by the banking industry because of high fees they've charged, or lack of explanation about what the products or services mean or can do for an individual. There are those individuals who are afraid of government conspiracy, afraid that they are going to have their money taken by the government if they put it in a bank.
Well, isn't it true that all checking accounts, regardless of the institution, are financially insured by the government?
Yes, but it doesn't mean that the government couldn't abscond with your money if they wanted to. We all know that. It happened in Mexico. So particularly a lot of people who've experienced government intervention and things are afraid to make their money known to the government. They don't think the government needs to know how much money they make. They don't think the government needs to have access to their money. What if the government came along and said, "I want your home, I'll just take it"? There are people that are afraid of those kinds of conspiracies in this country, so they're unbanked.
I suppose so.
There are people that are afraid, don't want their family to know what they make, so they won't get a bank account because they don't want a statement coming to the house.
Well, now that makes some sense to me.
There are a lot of reasons why people are unbanked today, but the biggest one is the cost of services, the lack of understanding of the benefits that could be derived from it, and mostly just the fear of the unknown.
Well, now that you mention it, there has been an awful lot of negative news, if you will, about banks over the past several months, especially the large institutions that were involved with Fannie and Freddie Mac, and the downturn in our economy and the mortgage crisis. I mean, it's a mess. And there's been a lot of news about that. So maybe a lot of people have distrusted financial institutions for that reason. Are they still safe to put your money in, do you think, Sharla?
Skip, I think financial institutions are just like any other institution. If they are managed well, they are extremely safe. If they're mismanaged, they're extremely unsafe. And so before an individual determines what bank or industry they're going to invest their monies into, they need to do some research. They need to find out what is the stability of this particular organization.
How do they do that research? Where do you find that information?
Well, you can find almost anything you want to know online
true.
these days. And so I think there's a lot of research they could do online, but they should come in and ask, what is your capital? How capitalized are you? The industry of credit unions, credit union with 77% capital is considered to be a well-capitalized credit union.
Mm-hmm.
However, we think it has to be a lot higher than that. So our percentage rate's much higher than that. So I think individuals just have to do a little bit of
research
and education.
All right, well, now that I've made a decision and I've done my research and I've figured out where I want to go and where I want to open my account, what's the procedure to do that? Can you kind of walk us through that so the mystery of this kind of goes away?
Well, when you come in the door, they're going to ask you to fill out an application, and that application is going to collect all the information they need to meet the criteria and the rules and regs that the government has put on them.
Would that be the Patriot Act that is
The
involved
Patriot
here?
Act is involved here very strongly. They want to know the name, the address, the phone number, social security number, driver's license. You need a federal ID, and a federal ID is defined as anything like a driver's license, a passport, a government-issued military ID, anything like that.
Okay.
And I understand in the near future you're going to have to provide your occupation as well.
Now, you said something about social security number. We talk an awful lot about ID theft in this program, and a lot of people are very paranoid about sharing their social security number with anyone, especially somebody they don't know, and a frontline clerk, if you will, or teller perhaps in a financial institution. Would that make some people uncomfortable, do you think?
I think anytime anyone's asked to share their social security number anymore, they're pretty nervous about it. But there are some environments they don't have a choice.
Are there safeguards involved in most institutions to take care of that, to ensure that doesn't get out? Or
all financial institution employees are bonded, and certainly the electronic systems are extremely highly secure.
Right.
That doesn't keep somebody from writing it on a piece of paper and taking it away. I don't care where you are, who you are, what you're with, which brings another point to looking at who is the financial institution you're dealing with, what is their reputation.
That makes sense.
I don't think, I think anybody can steal your ID anywhere anymore.
Of course they can.
But in some instances, the government requires that we have it.
Sure.
Because we have to report to the government.
Well, that makes sense, and that is part of the...
And that is part of the reasoning. And so you see, for an example, often you go into a doctor's office and they say, well, give me your social security number.
True.
The doctor's office doesn't need your social security number.
No.
And so you could argue with them about that. But unfortunately, in a banking environment, the law requires that we have it.
And that would be the actual Patriot Act.
And that would be the actual Patriot Act.
Okay, let me take this a step further. I've decided I'm the institution, I've opened an account, I've gone through the process. And I come down to a basic decision. Do I want checks? Do I want a debit card? Do I want both? Do I have a savings account along with this? Tell me what my choices are when I finally open up an account.
Well, they're all of the above. And your lifestyle makes a big difference as to the choices you make. But
really?
In today's world, I think so. If you're a go-getter and you're out there in the public all the time, the debit card is going to be a much more convenient way. I have a problem with this term convenient. I think we as a nation are really hung up on conveniences.
Really?
And sometimes we don't, conveniences are expensive.
True.
Conveniences are expensive.
True.
You pay more for convenience.
Yeah.
So I have to walk 2 blocks further or park for $21 at a parking lot,
Easy decision for me, I'm doing the walking.
Yeah, me too. But the younger generation is used to convenience.
True.
So your age may be a determining factor when I say your lifestyle. It may be because you're younger and you want quick, fast, easy, and you use a debit card.
Okay.
You may be an older population and you may go, I've been using paper checks since I was born and I'm going to keep using paper checks till I die. So each individual coming in has their own set of situations or circumstances that if I'm marketing to you or I'm serving you, I need to find out who you are and what your needs are, what your preferences are, and then I could make an appropriate
well, in
recommendation to you.
In theory as well, if I order checks, I'm going to have to pay for those checks.
In some institutions give you free checks.
Really?
Some of them will give you a free box
So
of
if
checks.
you'll take a look at your research that you've done, you're going to know that before you walk in.
You might, or they should tell you when you get there.
Well, that makes sense.
I would recommend everybody always keep at least 1 box of checks on hand. There is always a situation or a circumstance where you have to write a paper check. a point in hand might be my housekeeper doesn't take plastic.
Well,
I'm
no.
going to have to give her a check or give her cash.
Well, sure.
So-
or maybe paying your rent. Maybe your apartment complex doesn't take plastic either.
Correct.
Could certainly be the case. So, yeah, I can see where there might be some instances where you'd have to do that. Now, you're also going to be faced with another decision, and this is really something relatively new in Reg Z, and that would be the opt-in and opt-out option. What does that mean? What does it mean to opt in or opt out?
Well, the government in its wisdom is trying these days to protect the consumer from themselves in most instances. And opting in or opting out is a term that has been assigned, what's been a term that's assigned to lots of things, but in the financial industry regarding debit cards or plastic, before, if you used your debit card and the financial institution offered a product called Courtesy Pay, meant we honor your card no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to pay the overdraft fee if you overdraft your account.
There's that convenience again.
There's that convenience again.
Right.
And so if I go to 5 stores today and I don't realize my checking account's out of money, the banking industry just made a buku of money off of you because they've charged you $21 for overdrafting your account 4 or 5 times that you used it today.
And that's each time,
Each
right?
time.
Okay.
And so it's one thing if you're writing a check and overdrafting your account because you pretty much know that what you got in your account. But when you're using plastic, it tends to go faster, it
Doesn't
seems
it
like.
though, yeah.
And so people were paying these huge fees for things they really couldn't afford to do. And so the government said no more. You can do it, but the public has to tell you that they want you to do it, that they want you to set that convenience up for them.
So that would be opting in.
That would be opting in. I opt in to allow you to charge me for overdraft fees if I use my card and I don't have the money to cover it.
Now, most people would say, why in the world would you ever do that? I'm giving my financial institution permission to charge me $21 for bouncing a check or overdrafting my debit card. I'm giving them permission. Why would I do that?
Because you don't want to be embarrassed at the grocery store when you have a basket full of groceries that you can't pay for. Maybe at that time, maybe you are a young person out on a date with your favorite girl and you don't want to be embarrassed because that restaurateur says, sorry that you don't have any money in your bank account, you're going to have to wash dishes tonight.
Yeah, or
You
maybe
and your girlfriend come on back here and let's wash dishes.
Or maybe you're a cheerleader driving back from a football game and you need gas in your car and you go to the pump and swipe it and nothing happens.
And nothing happens.
I can see where that convenience
Would be
would
important.
probably make some sense.
True, but I highly recommend that you watch your bank account and know what's in it and save yourself that money.
Yeah, well, and if you do that online, which is certainly every institution provides that service these days.
Pretty much every
Yeah.
institution does, and students today are very tech savvy, so they can pick up their phone and check their bank account balance right then, right there.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you one last question about debit cards, and then I want to get to this credit union story because I'm really anxious to hear it.
All right.
Some institutions are experimenting with charges for debit cards, a monthly charge, $3, $5, something like that. Is that a trend in the industry, do you think? And if it is, what's causing this to happen? Because they've been free forever.
Once again, we're going to talk about the government protecting the consumer, and it's a long story. And without getting into it too much, there's been some back and forth about interchange fees between the merchants and the credit card providers, and the government stepped in and regulated that, and in doing so they've cost some revenue opportunities for the financial institutions. It can harm the financial institutions depending on the financial institution, the size. So in some cases they're looking for other ways to replace that lost revenue. And in our particular case at this time, we are not entertaining that. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't have to in the future. We don't know how we're going to be affected yet, and we're kind of taking a wait-and-see attitude here at the credit union.
Mm-hmm.
But it could definitely be a way you have to raise more revenues.
Could be coming down. Well, now when you talk about credit unions and banks, there are some interesting differences. And if you would just kind of outline what those are first, and then tell us, get us into this story about how credit unions started, because I think it's absolutely a fascinating story.
Well, credit unions and bank differ in corporate structure. A bank is more like a triangle, and at the bottom of that triangle are the consumers, and at the top of that triangle are the stockholders or the shareholders. The shareholders provide the capital to operate the banks and to run the banks, and the consumer hopefully makes the profits out of all of that. But if I'm a bank and I need more money, I go raise more capital from an outside source.
So you might sell more shares in your bank or
Might
whatever.
sell more shares in your bank or whatever. However, whatever they do does not affect the consumer, because the consumer's buying a product in the door, out the door. The shareholders in it to make money.
Right.
So the bank's real objective is to make money for their stockholders or their shareholders. At the credit union, the members are the shareholders or the stockholders. So we're more like a flatline organization. If the credit union makes a decision, financial decision, they have to make it in the best interest of their customer member and their shareholder member. So it has to be a good decision for everybody.
I see.
Big difference in the structure.
And a credit union is a nonprofit organization
No,
too.
it's a not-for-profit, and that's different.
Not-for-profit, okay.
And we have earnings, and the earnings can come either they come in and grow the credit union in branches, products, services,
Right.
or if they have excess earnings, it goes back out to the membership in the form of dividends.
Kind of like a stock dividend.
Except it goes to the members.
How about that?
Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting. All right, speaking of interesting, tell us how credit unions got started, because you told me the story, and I want our audience to hear it.
It was over 200 years ago in Germany, and the farmers were in a drought environment. And they were very perplexed as to what to do. They needed to buy seed to plant their crops, but unfortunately, the bank said, you can't forecast the drought end, and therefore we can't loan you the money. You're too big a risk for us. And the loan sharks, they were very interested in loaning the farmers money, and they wanted to do it on an on-demand note. And for those who don't know what an on-demand note is, it says, I will loan you money, but when I tell you I want my money back, you have to be able to give it to me, or I get to take the collateral that you pledged. In this case, it was the farms. Mm-hmm. And the farmers scratched their heads and they said, that doesn't sound like a very good idea to us. So they all got together to determine what they thought they could do, and they decided that they would pool their monies together, go buy the seed, share those seed, and then help each other harvest their crops at that end of the season, and then split how much the earnings made for everybody. Mm-hmm. And it worked so well that it grew and it grew and it grew, and today almost every country in the world has some form of credit unions that they support, particularly the underserved populations. We serve everybody, but we really like to help the underserved populations.
Now, speaking of that, and this is my final question because we're about to run out of time. If I want to join a credit union, do I have to be an underserved population, or do I have to be a member of a special class? Like when you say the word educators in your title, I think, well, I've got to be a teacher to be a member of this credit union. Is that true?
What used to be a lot more true. Used to be that it was a lot narrower. All credit unions are chartered, and in their charter it's defined as to who they can serve. Some can serve whole communities. Some can serve certain businesses or organizations. New Mexico Educators is known as a multi-common bond credit union, and here in New Mexico we serve everybody.
I see.
Pretty much, because we serve the faculty, staff, and students and their immediate family members, and so it broadens our ability to serve most people.
Sure, makes sense.
But they're very different kinds of credit unions, and so you just need to ask.
Very informative interview. Thank you very much for being with us and Focus on the Future.
It's been fun.
So what'd you think, kid?
I thought it was great. There's a lot of information when it comes to banking.
Oh my gosh, it is. And the thing that impressed me was that she had a lot of knowledge about a lot of issues in banking, and we covered a lot of ground.
She did. And the first thing that I heard when you guys were doing that interview was there is a fear by some folks in this country when it comes to storing their funds in a bank. But you know what? I think for the most part, the United States is a pretty safe place to keep your money.
I think so too. And when you start thinking about the fact that it is federally insured, either in a credit union or a bank, I think it's up to $250,000.
Yeah. I think it's pretty safe, but there are a lot of options when it comes to opening an account, and it really seems to come down to the individual, their preferences, their needs. Ask questions, do some research, find out what it is that is important to you. And also that whole opt-in, opt-out thing sounds a little bit complicated, but I think the bigger issue there is you need to have some personal responsibility about how many funds, how many dollars are in your account. So you don't have to worry about that as much.
I think you're right. And if you keep track of your balances, as she said, mm-hmm. then opting out is probably a reasonable option. But if you're not responsible, then guys, don't opt out. Opt in, because you don't want to be caught at 2 o'clock in the morning not being able to get gas in your car.
That could be a problem.
Oh, I think so.
And I loved how she ended, with that story about the credit union. That was really interesting. I love all those little historic facts.
I liked it too. So what's up next?
Up next, stay tuned for Budget Busters, to be followed by the Stock Market Corner.
We'll see you all next week.
Thanks, guys. Hi, welcome back. Having your own income for the first time in your life is exciting. It's your money now and you get to decide how to spend it. The very first thing you have to learn is that there is a major difference between gross income and net income. Gross income is how much you earn before taxes and deductions. Net income is the amount that you take home from each paycheck that you receive. Great. Well, what if you work for yourself or you work in a job where taxes are not deducted from your pay? You might be in for a huge surprise on April 15th, and I know this from personal experience. Remember that April 15th is the date that you must file your individual income tax return with the federal government. If you haven't had enough money deducted from your paycheck to pay the tax due, you'll have to write a check to the IRS. If you don't have a job where taxes are automatically deducted, you're going to have to write a big check to the IRS. So what you have to do is make sure that you don't have an April surprise. When you fill out your W-4, and that's the IRS form that you fill out when you get a job, choose 0 dependents for withholding purposes. This assumes that you're single and you don't have any children to support. If that's not the case, then choose the actual number of dependents that you may have to support. By the way, no, you don't count as your own dependent. This should result in enough taxes being withheld from your check to make sure that you won't have to write a check to the IRS. Heck, you might even get a refund. If you work for yourself or work in a job where no taxes are withheld, you have to be very disciplined or you're going to find yourself in a heck of a tax fix. We suggest that you set aside 25% of your gross income for income tax and FICA. The amount should be enough to cover the check that you might have to write on April 15th. If the amount that you owe is less, then you set aside, we'll go out to dinner, but make sure that you save the rest. Thanks, guys.
Hi, and welcome to Focus on the Future Stock Market Corner. I'm Tom Crow.
And I'm Emily New. How are you, Tom?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing good. There's a lot of stuff happening in the economy. I'm hoping that you can explain some of this to us.
So you've been paying attention to what's going on?
There's a lot of stuff going on. First of all, what's driving the markets?
What's driving the markets right now is, interestingly enough, the U.S. markets are being driven by what's going on in Europe. And
What's happening in Europe?
The so-called Eurozone, the European Central Bank right now is involved in some liquidity issues, which means they are doing what we did earlier and flooding the market with money to try and prevent what they call a run on the bank, which would be everybody showing up at once to take their money out. They don't have the cash to support that, but they're trying to assuage people's fears a little bit about whether or not their banks are going to remain solvent. And I think they're talking about Greece, Germany, and France have agreed to get together and continue to support Greece in their what they're calling austerity measures, which are economic measures being taken by the Congress and the leadership there to keep that country from defaulting on their debt.
Okay, so this kind of fear that we're hearing about in the U.S. is also happening abroad than
Absolutely.
In Europe and
we talked
the
last
EU
time about how big our economy is and how we can't help but affect every other economy in the world. So when the U.S. is in trouble, the other countries are in trouble as well.
So that liquidity that we're talking about over there, is that going to have some sort of effect or ramification here in the States?
Again, the more money they print, they're just kind of creating dollars out of thin air. They're selling government bonds. They're producing more dollars. Just as long as they don't run out of paper, they won't run out of money. It's kind of like having a checkbook and saying, well, I still have checks, I must still have money. They can continue to print cash. And what that means is, well, you know, if you have a certain amount of dollars and then you flood the market with twice that many, your dollar is automatically worth half what it was before they did that.
And that's what we're talking about.
That's called inflation.
Inflation, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Printing money when it doesn't really mean what the dollar says.
Your dollar is becoming worth less and less. Your purchasing power becomes lower every time they do that. And now that they've dragged in other currencies in other countries, it's going to kind of compound the problem. But it's also going to have the effect of smoothing out the entire the way each one of the individual countries' swings fluctuate. Having it tied to the dollar will somehow take some of that volatility out of the process.
Can we speculate on what that's going to mean for the dollar versus the euro and folks that are thinking about traveling abroad? What could that potentially look like?
A weaker dollar is not going to be good for traveling overseas.
Okay.
When a foreign currency is strong and you're trying to convert from dollars and spend euros or pounds or anything else, it's not going to work in your favor.
That's always a little tough when you're traveling and your dollar isn't worth as much
That's
when
right.
you're going over there. Also, let's talk a little bit about what happened last week. The president spoke about his whole big push on his speech was this jobs
Right.
bill, jobs, 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 jobs. What does that mean to our economy, and did the markets react to that one way or the other?
The markets haven't really reacted to it yet because even today, as far as I know, it's still not really a bill, in that no congressman or senator has put their name on it and entered it into the public record. So it's still just a proposal.
Okay.
The president's out talking to lots of groups trying to get support for it. Right now I'm hearing a lot of pushback from both sides that there's not a lot of support for it. It could be very interesting. Probably the worst thing that happened was there wasn't really anything new in it. People were looking for some leadership, some new ideas,
Right.
maybe something different, and it was pretty much just another stimulus package at a smaller
Okay.
amount. They're also looking at the fine print, figuring out how it's paid for, and that's another piece of bad news as far as I'm concerned, because the Congressional Super Committee that was chartered to come up with $1.5 trillion in cuts over the next 10 years, he just scratched that out and turned it to $1.97 trillion in cuts over the next 10 years. So that's how he's going to pay for his $470 billion stimulus 2 package.
Oh goodness, because I know that he mentioned something along the lines of trying to create some sort of incentive for small business. And with the economy as it is, I would assume that it's difficult for a small business owner to try to create a position that they don't really need at this point based on demand.
Well, the term risk comes up a lot in our conversations. And small business owners right now, and big business owners, are holding a lot of cash, but they are not willing to take the risk. I mean, myself included, we're a small business. As much as I'd like to hire some help around here,
Sure.
I don't want to take that risk because I don't know what that employee is going to cost me in terms of taxes, their health benefits,
Right.
and anything else that they attach to new employees. Yeah, the tax break would be nice, but people aren't willing to take the risk for that small incentive just yet.
Well, and I've heard too that consumer confidence is down a little bit, so it's harder for the small businessman to, get his products or services out there when consumers are a little bit more hesitant to spend.
When people are hoarding cash, they're looking for the sales, and so you'll see some spikes in activity. We just saw it, in fact, from last month's retail sales number. The back-to-school sales were good,
Right.
but if you did any back-to-school shopping, you noticed everybody had their prices slashed. So that means the company's margins were lower, their profits are going to be lower, their earnings are going to be lower, and when they start reporting that, the stock price is probably going to be negatively impacted.
And all the consumers were looking for a deal, scouring those ads,
Sure.
and
Everybody's
price
looking-
shopping.
Because your dollars are worth less, you gotta push them further.
Right. Well, before we finish up today, I just wanted to touch on an investment term. You and I talk about this all the time, and you're a huge proponent. And the term is diversification. Can you explain to us and the students what that means a little bit more?
Yes, it means, bottom line is you don't want all your eggs in one basket. You want stocks that represent various segments of the market, multiple areas. You also want to try and incorporate some commodities, if you can, some gold, some oil, any kind of metals that might come into play that you can get to. There are exchange-traded funds that you can buy to cover just about any of those areas. You can even look at agriculture, livestock. But you don't want to just have everything in one stock or in one particular sector.
Okay.
The one we always talk about, because I think the kids understand it, is like the teen retail clothing sector. If you own Aeropostale, Abercrombie, American Eagle, PacSun, and that's all you own, and that sector starts to take a hit,
Right.
the majority of your portfolio is going to get clobbered by that. If you look at those 4 or 5 companies and pick the one you think is best and stick with that one, maybe in a short term, like on a back to school or Christmas shopping thing,
Would make sense.
all of them will move
Right.
together.
Sure.
But for the longer term, you want to hold what's called the best of breed. Pick the one that, for whatever reason you choose in your analysis, makes it look like the best one to hang on to for a long time.
Okay.
And stick with that one, get rid of the others, and start looking at other areas. Right now, banks are questionable. And people, even though they've been forced by the Fed to improve their liquidity measures, I still am not buying any banks right now because
Yeah.
the future for them is just too uncertain. In an inflationary environment, You don't want to be in cash on the sidelines.
Sure.
You want to be in the commodities that are becoming worth more and more as the dollar becomes worth less and less.
Okay.
So that's where you want exposure to gold and silver.
Oh, okay. So what I love about where I personally invest is mutual funds, because I let a fund manager or somebody else figure it out for me, because if it were me, I would believe so strongly in one product and I would have all of my eggs in one basket, which is not a safe place to be.
But in that mutual fund, you have access to the information. Keep an eye, even if you're going to buy that and hold it for a long time. Every once in a while, once a quarter, once every 6 months, look at the fund and look at their top 10 holdings. That's easily available on Yahoo Finance. And you'll know what sectors they're concentrating in. You'll also notice whether or not there's been a big change in their investment philosophy. Like, you may have bought a large cap value fund that's looking for big companies at good prices. And all of a sudden they're buying high-tech stock companies with high P/E ratios. That's kind of out of character, and it may signify a shift in philosophy of the fund manager, and it's no longer in alignment with what your objectives were in owning that fund.
Interesting. Well, the bottom line is there's a whole lot to learn here. I'm learning right along with you guys out there at home, and I appreciate Tom. He's so helpful in explaining all this to us, to me. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.
Thanks.
Questions for classroom discussion. Number 1. What is the major difference between a credit union and a bank? Secondly, why should you be concerned about diversification in your investments? And finally, what is the difference between gross and net income?